My name is Gary Wong, and I'm the director of Center for Information Technology in Education. And welcome everyone. And today we have the honor to have Professor Lim Chirping, Chair Professors of Learning Technologies and Innovations from the Education University of Hong Kong. And at the same time, he is also carrying the role as the editor-in-chief of the Internet and Higher Education for those who are doing educational technologies, e-learning for higher educations, teaching and learning, and other related topics should be very familiar with this journal. And so today we have our honor to have Professor Lim with us, sharing with you more about the tips, hopefully, on how to succeed in publications and research. So before turning the time to Professor Lim, and this is my honor to introduce him. Professor Lim Tripping is a chair professor of learning technologies and innovations and associate dean international engagements at the Education University of Hong Kong, and a visiting professor at the UNESCO International Center for Higher Education Innovations. He has been the editor-in-chief of the Internet and Higher Education since 2015. Over the last 2 decades, he has engaged major education stakeholders at the national and international levels as his research and development partners for enhancing equities, qualities, and efficiencies in the education sector enabled by information and communication technologies. Okay, so without further ado, let's welcome Professor Lin.
Okay, very good afternoon, to all, and thank you, Gary. Just like for your information, I think more than 6-7 years ago, the Gary used to be a colleague in the Edu Hong Kong as well, right? But he went to the Faculty of Education in Hong Kong U, right? It's actually like quite tough, like being the Education University of Hong Kong because say when friends actually introduce you from abroad, right? They still think that you're from the Faculty of Education from the University of Hong Kong. So like we have got to always emphasize, no, I'm from the Education University of Hong Kong, right? Or like you can call it like 香港师范大学 right? But it's not like 师范大学 like 教育大学 right? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share with you my slides. You should be able to see it right now. Good. Okay, fantastic. Right, so I'm actually like going to talk through with you about research and publication, and then back to research and publication again, right? And I would say that quite quite a lot of the so-called the perspective, it may be from me as the editor-in-chief of the Internet and Higher Education, but I would say that half of the time it would be basically me as a researcher, as well as an author and a reviewer, right? So, like no doubt it's actually insights from the editor, right? But I would say that I would also be like sharing with you like my experiences as an author, researcher, and a reviewer, right? So in this the presentation, I hope I could like do it in about like 45 minutes to an hour max, right? I will try to like work through with you the research part first, right? But the thing is, it would be more of research in higher education, right? Uh, so there is research in various disciplines, but in this case, we'll be talking about research in higher education, right? I will talk about why research in higher education, why publish your work, right? And then after that, moving on to the publication itself, right? As in, like, how do we publish in higher education journals or journals in general, right? And then after that, I would move on to trends in research in higher education, right? Whereby we would be focusing on uh, three of the special issues. Two are already up in terms of the call for papers. One will be coming up soon, right? So I would be like sharing with you those special issue topics and to try to argue why those are topics whereby there are gaps in the research, especially with respect to internet-enabled higher education teaching and learning, right? So that would be what I would do. And like once I have actually gone through, you could be asking me questions, or I would say that as I am working through as well, you know, if you do have like questions, you may just like stop me and ask. Uh, so why do we engage in research of higher education teaching and learning, right? So we might be looking at this from quite a bit from the quality assurance perspective, right? Because like especially in universities in Hong Kong, you know, it's like we engage ourselves or we are supposed to go up for the quality assurance or the quality audit once in every 5 years or so, right? So, like, why do we engage in research of higher education, right? Think from the perspective of equality is quite clear, right? That if we engage in the research, right, we'll be gathering evidences, and from those evidences we could reflect upon the like teaching and learning practices within a discipline or across disciplines, right? But I think it's like quite often uh, when we are doing the research as well, right? Like besides for quality, two areas that are not really well looked into sometimes in higher education, teaching and learning is the whole notion of equity, right? So the equity might it's not just like inclusiveness, right? But it's also to be able to achieve the same quality, right? With the support given for all types of students, may they be students from marginalized like communities, so it might be students who are the linguistic minority, because say in Hong Kong, I would say that the medium of instruction in like most of the universities in most programs are in English, right? So if you have got linguistic minority again, they might be or they might need a bit more support, right, in able to ensure that they could achieve that quality of the learning outcomes, right? And of course, we have got the whole notion of efficiency. So when we look at the efficiency, there are two parts to the efficiency. The external efficiency is something that we do quite a bit in education research, right? So it includes things like being able to learn for life, right? So lifelong learning. So the concept of self-regulation, the concept of self-efficacy, etc., will come under external efficiency, right? But because like the majority of us who engage in education research and higher education like research, we are not really economics trained. So the other efficiency that we are talking about is actually internal efficiency, right? Where we look at the cost effectiveness, right? Like if we are going to be looking at, mean, it actually may not apply so much to the Hong Kong context, right? Because quite often uh, the Hong Kong universities are quite well resourced, right? But the thing is, the whole notion of cost effectiveness uh, may may actually be a more like pertinent like a more pertinent issue, right? In countries like Australia, etc., right? Whereby there is a greater squeeze in terms of the budget, right, of the university, right? So there will be a need, say, if you are going to implement online blended teaching and learning, how that may have an implications on cost, right? In terms of cost of facilities, cost of uh, teachers or lecturers who are teaching in that particular program, right? So when we are looking at research in higher education, teaching and learning, I think there's always the intention that we are trying to enhance higher education equity, quality, and efficiency, right? And of course, like at the same time, engaging in higher education, teaching and learning research, even if we are just looking at the learning environment or the classroom environment or the course environment, quite often um, based on the fact that the teaching and learning environment is being situated within the larger context of the university and of the society, right? So, in a way, as we are engaged in higher education, teaching and learning research, right? The key findings that we come up with would also be able to inform and guide the higher education teaching and learning policies, right? With respect to PD, with respect to the infrastructure, hardware, resource allocation, with respect to curriculum and assessment reforms, etc., right? And of course, looking at research in higher education, teaching and learning, right? The first two that I've actually like spoken about, there are a lot about practices and policies, right? And if we are publishing in practitioner-oriented teaching and learning journals, right? Most likely is good enough to have the first two, right? That your key findings should have implications for higher education policies and higher education practices, right? But the thing is, in order to be able to publish in an academic journal, right, there will be a need to be able to show that there is that contribution to that scholarship, right? So quite often there's a lot about testing and generating theories, right, that explain responses and solution to higher education teaching and learning questions, issues, and challenges, right? So it's just a point like to note because it's like especially in higher education teaching and learning journals, right? We receive a lot of the manuscripts. They are able to touch upon the first two really well, right? But quite often there is very little contribution to the existing scholarship in that particular area, right? Maybe massive open online courses, maybe VR, AR in higher education, right? There have not been enough the manuscripts that are actually like being submitted at times, right? That really hit on the scholarship of higher education teaching and learning, right? So if it's going to be an academic journal and if you do not have the last one, quite likely it's going to be a desk reject. It won't even go to the reviewers, right? Okay, so why do we seek to publish our research of higher education teaching and learning? Again, that is quite a mix, right? It's like you want to be able to share promising practices and lessons learned, right? Because you are a community of learners, a community of higher education practitioners, right? You want to share your promising practices and your lessons learned, right? But of course, uh, like being as pragmatic as possible. At times, it is part of the promotion and tenure process, right? So that like pressure for like not just to be able to win grants, right, but to be able to write up the key findings that are generated from the grant, right? And of course, like intrinsically as a scholar, right, you would want to be able to constantly contribute to the scholarship of the higher education teaching and learning in whatever of the areas it may be. It might be on Gen AI, it may be on learning analytics, etc. Right. So that is why we publish. Right. Okay. So now it comes to like how do we exactly publish in higher education research journals? Right. So if you like take a look at the internet and higher education, we are probably the top ranked higher education research journal. Uh, yeah, so yeah, the top ranked one probably like in the entire world, right? Right. But of course, those are like based on site scores, and those are right based on SSCI, etc. Right. So it may not be something that peer actually like rank us as the top one, right? But yeah. Um, so I think in terms of the higher education, we are probably like the top, and we have been top for the last like maybe close to 8 to 10 years, right? And we are probably usually the second one, at times first, right, for education technology, right? Is like usually computers and education or us, right? Um, Computers and education is quite similar to us, but also quite different from us, because computers and education basically deals with all subsector of the education sector, right? Or even non-education like sector, right? So it deals with from TVET to K to 12 to early childhood education, right? Right through to the higher education, right? As compared to the internet and higher education, we very much focus just in the higher education sector, right? That means the research context must be the higher education context. So even if you look at the like numbers of articles that we publish, it's actually quite like different as well. They would have about 6 issues per year. We would probably have just 2 or 3 issues per year, right? Right, because we tend to only attract more of higher education uh, teaching and learning researchers, right? Um, so it's probably a point to take note of. Right, so when we actually look at how do we publish, I think it's quite important to know like what there is in our field, right? So there are the more specific ones in terms of internet and higher education, where we focus on internet teaching, no, the internet enabled teaching and learning in higher education, right? Right. So it must be internet enabled teaching and learning, right? As compared to something which is quite uh quite similar to us, but it need not be about internet enabled, right? Like for example, the teaching in higher education, right? Which would be looking at a range of teaching and learning environments, right? Um, then after that, of course, we have got the like the Austro-Asian Journal of Education Technology, which at times could be a bit even more specific compared to like what we have in the internet and higher education, right? But for the Austrian Asian, they tend to look at post-secondary, right? So it might include TVET as well, right? But the thing is, what they tend to be looking at in terms of the region uh, for the for the research, right? It must be in Australasia, right? So like it must be in the Asian context or the Australia, New Zealand context, right? Um, right? And then, of course, like there are other higher education teaching and learning journals that are very discipline focused, right? So, so there's things like Education for Business, there's Journal of Engineering Education, etc. some of them are pretty like high there in the journal ranking as well, right? So think as a like higher education like researcher, just like if you are ag researcher, there's a need like for you to be able to have a good idea of the range, right? The range of the journals that are available to you to publish in, right? Um, when I was a uh, young PhD grad, right? Like 2 decades ago, right? When I was still in the National Institute of Education in Singapore. Uh, um, so at that time was like 2001, right? When I was just made an assistant prof, right? I actually remembered that one of the first thing that I did when I reported to work was I spent about 1 week in the library, right? And okay, because like at that time, most journals are not online, right? Um, right? So most journals are just hard copies, right? So I actually spent like 1 week taking out all the ag journals, right? And really like having a really good sense of what these journals are, what type of papers were published in these journals, who are their editorial board members, who are their editors, what are their specialization, right? And like besides the ag ones, which other journals actually would be publishing like ag type of papers as well, right? So I think as a researcher, it really like makes sense like for us to have quite a good idea of uh the journals that we intend to publish in and how uh, the so-called research that we are doing are actually aligned to some of these journals, right? Before identifying the journal that you want to be sending to. Right. I would probably first deal with some don'ts and do's first, right? It is just like something that we experienced in the like last 10 years, right? Whereby it is that when manuscripts come to us with these don'ts, we tend to do desk reject, or they would be very quickly rejected by the reviewers that we send to as well. Right. So, yeah, don't focus solely on the design of the innovation, right? So we need to be able to focus on the design of the innovative learning environment or the learning environment in which the innovation is being embedded or integrated in, right? So, we need to be quite careful that it is not the innovation that we are studying per se, right? We are actually studying the use of the innovation within a particular context, right? Don't focus on the features of an application, it be a mobile app, etc., or strategy, right? So again, what we should be like looking at is how it is being used, right? And the thing is, is it being used for what, right? Like as what I said, most of the research that we engage in the education sector is really a lot about how we use the internet or how do we use technologies, right? Or how do we adopt a particular strategy in order to enhance student learning engagement and outcomes, right? Which is very much about quality, right? Of course, it would be good if I mean, there are actually uh, like papers that look into the efficiency as well, the external efficiency, where we look at self-regulation, where we look at lifelong learning, where we look at students being able to monitor and manage their own learning, etc. Right? As what I've said before, and I would be saying it towards the end as well, the equity part is like something that we probably need to pay a bit more attention to, right? And it is actually something that I am trying to probably like commit more of my resources in the last 5 years, right? In really thinking through the equity issue in education and what exactly is the role of ICT or technologies or emerging technologies, right? In being able to address that equity issue. Right. The third one is don't be tempted by trends in innovative teaching and learning, right? There's always a need to go back to the basics because uh, um, it is really about student learning engagement and outcomes, right? Uh, Regardless of what innovations that we are bringing into a course, into a program, right? It is about the students being the main beneficiaries, right? And it is about them being engaged and them being able to achieve the expected learning outcomes, right? Of the course or of the programs, right? The the fourth one is yes, it's like there is potential in terms of technologies, right? So it's like if we just look at the concept of affordances, right? The affordances of technologies for teaching and learning, right? I think when we look at the affordances, we are not just looking at the type of opportunities that it provide us in order to meet certain outcomes, right? But the thing is, we need to be aware that there are certain limitations as well, right? When we are looking at an innovation, right? So that recognition of the limitations is quite critical. That means, it's like uh, uh, you must actually uh, like be able to design activities or provide extra support to be able to address those limitations, right? Right. So like um, if we just like look at something as recent as the chat GPT, it's like we could see a lot of opportunities for students to carry out uh say an inquiry, right? Within a particular topic or within a particular area, right? But actually students having the control to be able to carry out the inquiry driven by them is a good thing, right? But of course, that is assuming that they have the competencies to carry out that inquiry. So again, how do we support students to carry out the inquiry so that eventually ChatGPT is something that is student driven, right? That would then be able to enhance their learning process and achieving uh, the expected learning outcomes, right? I think the like last one, it applies a lot to education research that we do not try too much to like generalize the findings that we have, right? Because the findings that is being generated from our research is usually very context dependent, right? So if we are able to provide a rich description of the research context in which the innovation take place, uh, then when the readers are reading it, right, and they could relate to what you are looking at, that to me is generalization, which is great, right? But we do not try to we do not try to do the generalization for them, right? Right. So that context specific, context dependent part, right, would mean that quite often when we do a piece of research, it don't have to be just qualitative research. It can be quantitative, very quantitative type of like research, where you use the structural equation modeling, etc. Right? But you still need to provide a rich description of the uh, research context, like who your lecturers are, who your students are, what type of right, what type of program is it, etc. So the don'ts also very negative, right? Yeah, but the thing is, like we really like what computers and education, uh, like actually what they have done in terms of like providing a dues, right? Say, okay, those manuscripts that are coming to us, these are what we expect from you, right? So if you could take some time, like studying their dues, their advice, I think it is something that applies to all types of journals, all types of the manuscripts, right? So if we start from the first one, it must be aligned to the aim and the scope, right? So it must be aligned to the aim and it must be within the scope. I mean, it's actually quite a no-brainer, right? But as the editor-in-chief, you still get all kinds of manuscripts, right? I get manuscripts from K to 12 as well. It's like, why do you send a K to 12 uh, type of manuscript? And at times it's quite a well-written like manuscript to a higher education journal, right? And waste or a couple of days, right, waiting for the editor in chief to just reject you, right? Right. So it's like waste of time, waste of the resources, right? Like to be able to include a appropriate current comprehensive lead review, that is quite a no-brainer as well, right? That you must be drawing upon, not just past scholarship, but the thing is more contemporary like scholarship as well. The like research methods, of course, high level of critical analysis, right? And think the point about explicitly indicate how they advance the field, it is quite aligned to what I shared with you about being explicit about what exactly is your contribution to the scholarship, right? It's like we don't expect one small little paper to really advance the field significantly per se, right? One paper is not going to change the world, right? But you must be explicit about how are you contributing, right? It might be to extend a particular model, right? Extend and expand a particular model. It might be to question a particular component of a framework, right? So those are all about like advancing the field, right? It could be about creating doubts, right? To a set of underlying like philosophies, right? So as long as you're able to articulate that, that is fantastic. Um, to comply with the author guidelines, again, no like brainer. If we require APA referencing, then give us APA referencing, right? Don't give us like something else, right? Uh, not have been like submitted and published elsewhere. That is quite important because um, first I would say that probably like back in my days, 20 years ago, when to submit a journal, you must actually print out three hard copies, right? Three hard copies of your manuscript. I could see like Gary is actually grinning, right? Because you don't belong to that era, right? Right. So you really need to literally print out three hard copies and you put these three hard copies into a snail mail, right? That might take 1 week or 2 weeks to reach the US, the UK, or Australia, right? Right. And then after that, the editor would then send your one copy of your manuscript to one reviewer and then send another to another reviewer. Sometimes you are required to send more copies, right? Depending how many reviewers they want to send to. So I would say that those days, if you are not really ethical, right? And you submit to Internet and Higher Education, Computers and Education, Learning and Instruction, nobody is likely to know, right? Because everybody just have your hard copy, and editors sometimes hardly exchange the information. But now, when everything is submitted through the system, right? Whenever we get another paper that is submitted to elsewhere, right? Um, um, we actually would, or that manuscript would be flagged to the editors in chief, right? Some editors in chief are actually really, really uh, firm about such issue. Uh, like we try not to burn a career by notifying the university, but I have seen instances whereby universities have been informed, right? Uh, Especially if it had been published somewhere else, like it had been published in a book chapter and then published in the journal, right? So in that case, uh, quite a lot of the editors in chief, including myself, we would actually get a publisher to write an email to the institution, right? In the case of like multiple submissions of uh, the manuscript. Uh, there are some journal editors. I have just like met one quite recently online because they actually submitted to mine and submitted to his and submitted to another one. And for his journal, he just told the author that the system would block you from submitting to our journal ever again, right? Right, right. So we do not intend to have their um like my I would probably just give a really like stern warning that is unethical to do so, right? But like basically what I'm saying is that it is unethical, right? But the thing is nowadays it is not just about um unethical per se, but the thing is there might be quite a bit of the repercussions, like given that everything is submitted online, right? For the computers and education, and I think for quite a number of the journals, quite often once you have been rejected, you're not allowed to resubmit unless there is a discussion with the editors in chief to say, okay, we would be making this or that changes and we would be resubmitting it as a new submission. Then that may be possible, right? But quite often we do not actually want to be able to review a paper that have been rejected. Right. So like we talk tons about aims and scope, right? And um it is it is something that we really need to pay a lot of the attention to. Um like at times I'm asked question like it's like do you start do you start writing a manuscript and then when the manuscript is completed you look for a journal, right? I would say yeah, in an ideal world that is great, right? If you have got maybe like 48 hours per day, right, and like 10 days per week, right? Then you could do that, right? But I think for us, where we have got so like many things at hand, we have got to teach, we have got to research, we have got to be a father, we have got to be a husband, we have got to be a wife, we have got to be a mother, right? Then we have got 24 hours a day. What I would recommend at times is, it's like try to identify a journal first and try to align your manuscript towards that journal, like towards the expectation of the journal, and then start writing your manuscript, right? But that is not really a professional advice, it's probably just a personal advice thing, right? That I think that alignment is actually like quite critical, right? And of course, if you want to submit something to computers and education, you have got to ensure that in your references there are there are references from computers and educations. So like how do you submit to a journal whereby you have not read anything about it, like you have not read anything and you have not cited anything from that journal, right? So my advice is try to identify the journal first based on the research you have conducted, the research findings that you have, and then start writing the manuscript. Yeah. Okay. Think when we are talking about like publishing, and I'm quite sure like the rest of the editors that have come on this series would have actually spoken about this, right? But I'll like probably just like go through again, right? It's like what exactly is that review process, right? Um, for internet and higher education, we receive about 1,000 over manuscripts, uh, but it's a low 1,000, right? Uh, like per year. So there are two editors in chief, right? So which means that say we would probably be like doing at least one manuscript a day, right? So there would be one manuscript to us popping in our desk, like popping up in our editorial like dashboard per day, right? So this manuscripts would come to us. Right. And usually most editors like myself will spend between 10 to 20 minutes to work through the paper, right, before deciding whether they should be sent out for reviews. Right. So, it's like I'll be like looking at the scope, I'll be looking at the rigor, I'll be looking at the contribution to the scholarship, etc. Right. Before like sending out to the reviewers, right? And then once it's sent out to the reviewers, um, most of the journals would have a set of rubrics or template, right? Whereby the reviewers could go through, right? It's quite frustrating dealing with reviewers these days, including myself as a reviewer, right? Because we just got so many journals these days, and at times reviewers do not have the time. So at times when we send out an invitation asking them to reply within like 1 week or within 10 days, uh, they might do a decline only after 10 days, and then you got to re-invite somebody else again. Those are still okay. The worst ones are those who accept. They accept your invitation, right? Which means that now they have got about 2 to 3 weeks to review the paper, right? But then eventually, after a lot of reminders, they did not do the review, right? So after 1 month, you have got to look for new reviewers again, right? So I hope that the authors are understanding that, hey, it's like why editors are taking 3, 4, 5 months, right, just to go through the review process itself, right? Because at times it's just due to the invitation of reviewers, and then after that, reviewers taking a long time to accept or to decline the invitation, and eventually whether they do it or not, and then we might need to get a completely new set of reviewers again, right? So then after that, the reviews come in. The editors again would usually spend at least 15 to 30 minutes looking at the reviews before making a decision. I was asked once, or not once, quite a number of times, but I was asked actually only yesterday by one of my junior colleagues, like, what if the review come back to you? One is accept and one is reject. What would you do, right? I think for me as an editor-in-chief, I would always make myself the third reviewer, right? So I would review the paper like a reviewer, right? But of course, that takes quite a lot of time, but that is going to be much quicker, right? I know, like when I am really busy, right, I would actually send the paper out to another reviewer, right? But that would take at least another three weeks to 1 month, right? But if I am the reviewer, uh, I could actually like do it within 1 or 2 days, right? So we try to always uh, be as supportive of our authors as possible. So one accept, one reject. Sometimes you need a third reviewer. Or at times we call a lot on our editorial board member, right? So contacting one of our editorial board members, say, hey, we have got this situation. Can you make a decision about this paper in the next like 1 or 2 days, right? So we have different like options, right? And of course, uh, quite often the acceptance and the like rejection to extreme is quite rare, right, is actually very rare. It is usually reject and minor revision or reject and major revisions, right? It is maybe one out of 300 times, it would be one accept, one reject, right? And if it's one accept, one reject, quite often it's just a case of very different perspective, right? and 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 it's just very different perspective, very different background of the reviewers, right? So we need to be able to understand it, right? Then after that, once we have made the decision, send it to the authors would be doing the revisions and addressing the comments, suggestions, etc., right? And revise the manuscript and respond to the comments. We always try to send back to the original reviewers, but it does not always happen that way, right? So at times we need to send to one original reviewer and the other one might actually decline the invitation to review again the revised manuscript. So we might need to call upon somebody else, or again, the editors need to serve as the reviewer again, right? Which is quite like time consuming. So actually, as the editor in chief, uh, say even if we like receive about say uh okay, say if we do like receive quite a number of manuscripts per week, right? But that whole time spent on the desk review, spent on the decision making, right? I would say that we actually easily spend about 10 hours per week, right? Just like doing the editorial job for the journal itself. Yeah. Okay, so because it is quite critical for you to understand that process, right? Because then you would understand why things are happening in a certain way, right? And you would also understand what to expect and therefore try to meet up with that expectation as well, right? Right. This may be something new to quite a lot of you, right? It is something that me and my editor-in-chief try to promote, right? That when we do a publication, I think it is quite critical that we see publication as a collaborative process, right? That you as an author, okay, no doubt when you publish, your name is there, right? And your co-author's name are there. But basically at the end of the day, right, the reviewers play a big role and the editors play a big role in that manuscript as well, right? So why is that collaborative view of publication important, right? That collaborative view of publication is important because that is the only way whereby the quality of manuscripts could be sustainable over a period of time, right? Because if the reviewers do not give good review and constructive review, right, the quality of the manuscript published would always be compromised, right? I could actually see the trend over the last 20 years, right? When I was first a graduate student, including me as an assistant prof, whenever I send out a manuscript, I mean, I would have 2 or 3 pages of reviews coming back, right? And I would say that that first 3 or 4 years of my career, I learned so much about publishing, so much, yeah, right? I learned so much about publishing. I learned so much about being a good researcher. Learned like so much about being a scholar, right? Right. But now when you look at a lot of review comments, they are usually half a page or like 1 page, right? So what we are trying to promote is, it's like as a reviewer, I think if we do take up a review task, I think we must be committed to it because we are really trying to support the author to do a quality publication that would eventually serve our field, right? And that is quite critical. The ironic thing is that there are a lot of authors that have published with my journal that have refused to serve as reviewers ever, right? So I won't name names, right? But we have got just so many instances, it's like they just like uh they just like refuse to be a reviewer at all, right? So it is probably like something for you to think about. Both the Vanessa and myself, we actually did a chapter on one of the publication uh, by I actually forgot like this group, this like society. I think the Gary like may know. Okay, it's the same bunch as the ETR&D bunch. What is uh that association called? It's called the,
AECT.
that's right, it's the AECT. So we actually like uh published this in AECT publication, right? Whereby all the AgTech uh journal editors were contributing to that like the AECT like publication, right? So I mean, it's just a view that we have, especially after like having served first as an associate editor and then after that as the editor in chief for the last 12 to 14 years, right? Right. That view of publication is quite critical, right? Yeah, because if that view is actually taken out from the publication process, then I think like publication itself might die quite a natural death in terms of quality, right? In terms of the selfishness as well, right? Because when a paper is published, the one that is being rewarded is the author. That's all, period. Right? It's not the reviewers, it's not the editor, right? But I think is as a reviewer, you actually gain quite a lot from that process as well, right? You learn what is important, what is not important, what should be addressed, and what cannot be addressed, right? Yeah, so it's just like something for you to think about. Right. So, just a quick plausible approach to the research to publication, right? think we really like need to like go back to the basics, right? And like really look at the student learning needs and gaps in teaching and learning practices, and especially for EdTech researchers, how our technologies may be able to like address the needs of the students better, or be able to address some of those gaps in teaching and learning practices, right? To be clear about what contributions your research study had to the scholarship, right, is really very important. Uh, the third one is, I think, be open to form interdisciplinary team. I think it is really important. Um, we have a lot of engineering professors, medical professors. I mean, they are big names in their own field. But when they write something for the internet and higher education, it is still well written, but it says nothing at all, because they do not know the field. So if they have worked with somebody from the Center for Higher Education Teaching and Learning in their university, or from somebody from the education faculty, there would be a much higher chance that that paper could have gone through the review process and could be published, right? And of course, like the last one is you must be educated about the journals, right? And then after that, choosing um, the journal in such a way that it is something that your research findings is or are actually aligned to, right? So I actually would like to quickly just like go through the three special issues that we are going to have, right, in like my journal. Um, and uh, and you might call it trying to address the gaps in research, or you might want to call it as uh, trying to uh, like create some sort of a trend in an area that is not very well done, right? So we came up with three topics, and when I say we, I would say that me, the editor, and the editorial board. So if you look at the editorial board is quite well represented, east to west, junior and senior staff, more tech people and more education people as well, right? We came up with three. One is the capacity building of the higher education workforce for ICT enabled teaching and learning, right? It it need not be just about the uh, higher education teachers or higher education lecturers. It could be about capacity building of university leaders as well, right? Right, so that they would be able to better drive and support ICT enabled teaching and learning. Um, I will not be going through the rest of my slides here, right? Because I want some like questions and the comments, but I have shared my PPT with like one of the Gary's team member, like Sophie, right? So I think she would probably upload the PPT and you could just like look through this, right? But the key thing about the capacity of the higher education workforce is that there's a set of key competencies that we actually require from them to be able to engage in quality higher education teaching and learning, right? And being able to achieve and to be able to develop those competencies, professional development is key, right? Right. I actually like talk through the importance of professional development, right? And how we could achieve scale in uh, how we could achieve scale in professional development itself, right? The second one is not really a gap, it's more of a trend. right, is something that you see more and more in other journals as well. So we are receiving so many manuscripts on Gen AI that we thought, okay, why not just start a special issue on Gen AI, right? So Gen AI in higher education, teaching and learning, like including that, like that focus of how do we create assessment tasks, right, in such a way that Gen AI could be better integrated within our program or our course, right? Um, so it could be from the practice perspective, or it could be from the policy perspective. I know that in Hong Kong, there are quite a lot done at the policy and professional development perspective, and also to be able to support the students, right, in actually using Gen AI in such a way to carry out inquiry, right? So again, I have like some slides here and trying to really uh, uh like differentiate the like traditional AI that we see, right, in intelligent tutoring system and what we see in Gen AI as well. What a couple of young colleagues and I, okay, when I say young, they are probably like younger than Gary, right? Right. We actually in Feb last year at about like this time, we tried to reconceptualize ChatGPT and how it's being seen in higher education, and actually seeing ChatGPT as a student-driven edtech, right? Because a lot of the edtech that we see are being introduced by the professors and the lecturers in the courses. But ChatGPT is quite different in a way, right? That is very much like student driven, right? And 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 um and we actually like talk through how ChatGPT is an enabler in the higher education and how it could be able to uh, like address the issue of higher education equity, quality, and efficiency. So you can work through this yourself. Okay, the last one is what I have mentioned at the beginning of this presentation is this whole notion of equity, right? So when we look at the higher education like sector, it's like we look into a lot of quality engagement outcomes, right? We look a bit on efficiency, lifelong learning, self-efficacy, self-regulation, but quite often the equity part is actually missing, right? So the next special issue in the internet and higher education that we will be calling for papers soon would be the equity part, right? Right. How could we draw upon the internet to achieve that the equity, right? To be able to create better access and better support for students from marginalized communities or like mature age students, like students that are coming into the university after spending 10, 15 years in a job, right? And who are mothers and fathers, right? Like like how do we provide them with that internet enabled support to actually create better equity as well? And think the whole equity thinking. It had been there, but I think when we look at the pandemic, the equity problem became even, I would say, more pertinent, right? Where there were university closure and school closure, and you could see large communities, especially those in remote and rural areas, those who are low socio-economic groups, including in Hong Kong as well, right, that are deprived of that learning, right? Right. So, it's like it might be access, but it's not just access per se, right? It might be like the lack of resources to really cater to some very different learning needs, right? I think those like students with special like learning needs, they were really quite marginalized during the pandemic as well, right? Being deprived of a lot of technologies that they have access on site that they do not have access to when they are doing the learning at home, right? Right. And so that like rethinking about uh it's like we always say like university, right? Uni is one, right? But the thing is now when you look into the whole notion of online and blended teaching and learning, micro credentials, etc., right? You are beginning to see more of, the whole notion of multiversity, right? It's like you could get credits from this university, that university, and eventually you get a degree. So it is something that you might want to think about as well. Massive open online courses which have been actually around for more than 10 years, right? And of course, the whole notion of localization as well, right? When we talk about digital resources, we talk about massive open online courses, etc., right? I, I think the whole notion of being able to localize your resources are quite important. It's not just localization in terms of the language, but also localization in terms of the content and the examples, right? Which is really pertinent, right? All right. So I would probably end now. There's about maybe 8, 9 like minutes where you could give comments and ask questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Lim. Thank you for your wonderful presentations and very comprehensive. And it touches on a lot of major issues in research and publications and how we can excel in our research disseminations and build our scholarship. So thank you so much. And me myself learned a lot from your seminars for sure. So within the next 8 minutes, and we do have a few questions in the Q&A box, and see whether Professor Lin, you can look at these questions and address them. Do you have a way to see this Q&A box? So if you go to the Q&A tab, and you should be able to find that there are two open questions.
So what's the first question is I actually don't find this. Say that now because there's so many journals around, and so like hard to it's so hard to get good reviewers or even any reviewers at all. Right? So if we get if we get a good revision, um, like in most of the journals when there is no revision, it's usually a dash rejection, right? But it's because if it's a dash rejection, I think most, or at least me, uh,
Yes, I think there's some audio issues on your side.
it just is getting it type. Some of an issue someplace.
Hi, Professor Lim. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can like hear you.
But we cannot hear you too well.
And I making the talk just now. That's great.
Maybe there's some connection problem on your side, or maybe the microphones is not too close to you.
I actually will change
Yeah, the sound was perfect. right before you conclude. Now it's a little bit distorted. Don't know why.
Yes.
It sounds like the yeah, still a little bit distorted. Well, there's always a major issue with the internet, right?
I did change the placing of the mic. Might still have the same place. But if I speak a bit like closer.
Not really making much improvement. Don't know why.
If what if I leave and I come back in 30 seconds?
Give it a try. We'll be here waiting for you. In the meantime, I can entertain a bit here,
Yeah, okay.
the
You might
audience.
want to sing one.
Yes, so due to the technical issue, so let's wait for Professor Lim's return. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, feel free to just put into the Q&A box. And if we cannot address all of them, we will send it to Professor Lim's through email, and hopefully you can have a contact with him.
Okay,
Hi,
good
Professor
now?
Lim. Much
Good.
better. Much better.
Sure. Oh,
Yes.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's strange. I think the like the mic probably think that I was like speaking a bit too much and say, shut up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe that's the end of the seminar. But now
Yeah,
I think
okay, goodbye.
let's
Thank
resume.
you.
Let's resume. Let's resume.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I would first like address the Guokai. Guokai, right? Yeah, yeah. So um so uh like as what I said, the no revision thing is I think due to the fact that due to the fact that I think it's so tough to get good reviewers or even any reviewers sometimes that they just have that no revision there. I have never had any experience of like a set with no revision. I think it's quite close to impossible, right? But the thing is, in most journals, if it's like reject, it's usually a desk reject, and I think even if it's a desk like reject, we would tell you why is it a desk reject. It's it's never like oh reject no like no revision. Yeah, so I do not want to really criticize or comment on some other people's journal, right? But having no revision is strange. First time I'm seeing it or hearing. Okay, so next one is by Penjin, is it? Penjin. Yeah. Right. So two questions. Yeah, so if you are actually asked to review a paper and it's not in your area, right? So if let's say if you are more of a qualitative person and quite unfamiliar with some of the quantitative methodologies, I think you could just very politely and say this is not my area, right? And if the editor is upset, then that's not your problem. That's the editor's problem. Something is wrong, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's not your area, and you are already polite enough uh, to state that it's not your area of expertise, right? Actually, most reviewers they usually just do a decline, but most good reviewers usually they do a decline and they explain why they do a decline of your invitation. And some even better reviewers would decline and then they propose, oh, you might want to get my colleague or my PhD student. Yeah, so if the editor is quite upset, then that is his or her problem. You should not be concerned at all. Yeah, yeah. You should probably just tell him or her. do get a life. Yeah, yeah. Um, so the last one is rejecting the request that leads to no. Yeah, yeah. Mean there is no negative consequences for not like not actually doing a review. I mean, if you don't have the time, you don't have time. If it's not your area, it's not your area, right? If there's a conflict of interest, it's a conflict of interest, right? So no negative consequence. But of course, if you have been an author in that journal before, right, and the whole publication process was a pleasant one, you might want to contribute a bit more to that journal as a reviewer. Okay, so what are the rewards? Okay, I think the rewards are very, first is very intrinsic, right? It's about you learning when you are reviewing somebody else's paper, right? Because when you are critical about somebody else's paper, you're more likely to be critical of your own paper eventually. So you learn a lot about publication by being a reviewer. To tell you honestly, if you put I have been a reviewer for this or that journal in your CV, okay, maybe it might be good for your first job, but for your promotion, it's not really going to help much at all, right? Because it's an expectation that all scholars must do reviews, right? But I think if you are looking at a pragmatic reward, right, a real reward, right, I would say that for most journals, the publishers and the editor-in-chief, we actually have a breakdown of all the reviewers, who are the top reviewers in our journal, right? And usually, we would we would approach the top reviewers to ask them to be in our editorial board, right? Those who have been reviewing two or three per year or three or four per year, right? We would approach them, especially when we try to come up with a more diverse the editorial board, right? And when we are refreshing refreshing the editorial board. So, in fact, I know that like I meet my publishers maybe at least like once a year, and we would go through the reviewer list. And I think most of the reviewers that are really working hard for us, we always ask them to be in our editorial board. And it is quite difficult to be an associate editor or editor-in-chief if you have not been in any editorial board, right? It's just close to impossible unless you want to be the editor of a fly-by-night type of the journal, which is fine, right? But I think quite often if you want to be an editor or a associate editor of an established journal, right? I think the minimal expectation is you must have served in the editorial board. So if you look at the whole process of the reward, uh, it's actually quite long. It might take you 3 years, it might take you 5 years, it might take you 10 years, right? Um, uh, yeah, it might be, so if you say a reward, like to me, I think that is a reward in terms of the recognition, right? And that recognition would mean the pressure for you to serve your so-called the community. Yeah. Okay, I think
Well,
like Gary is saying,
yeah,
time's up.
yeah. So I guess in viewing of the time, and so we need to conclude this seminars. And I know there are a lot of the good questions there, and I would recommend you to email to Professor Lim. I'm sure he will be happy to answer some of these questions by email. And once again, thank you, Professor Lim. And it would be nice to see you in person next time, very soon. And
Yeah, come to Taipo and get some fresh air.
well, as long as you send me an email, I will be there right away.
Okay, okay, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for participating in our seminars. Hopefully, we will see you all next time. Thank you very much.
All
Have a
right.
good day. Take
Thank
care.
you. See you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.